In the year 1929, a quiet room inside the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul carried the scent of old parchment and forgotten ink. Shelves rose high, filled with manuscripts no hand had touched in centuries. Dust floated in the golden light that broke through narrow windows. It was here that a scholar, tasked with cataloging the remnants of Ottoman archives, came upon something strange. He pulled from a pile of neglected scrolls a rolled piece of parchment that seemed heavier than the rest, as though it held secrets that refused to die. When he spread it across the table, the room fell into silence. What lay before him was not a common chart of seas and lands known to sailors of the Ottoman world. This was different. Bold colors still clung to the parchment, reds and blues that had not faded with time. Carefully inked coastlines stretched across its surface, filled with notes in an old script. Ships, animals, and even mythic creatures danced in the margins, the kind one might expect from a medieval imagination. At first glance, it was only another artifact of cartography, but the longer he looked, the more unsettling the details became. The scholar's eyes followed the outlines of South America. The shape was precise, almost unnervingly accurate. For a chart drawn in the early 1500s, he leaned closer. The placement of the rivers, the curve of the coastline, it was not guesswork. It was knowledge. Knowledge that should not have existed at that time. Maps of that century were clumsy, often distorted, shaped more by rumor than by reality. Yet here, stretched before him, was a coast drawn with a precision modern explorers themselves had only recently begun to confirm. Whispers spread quickly among those who saw it. The name Piri Reis was signed on the map an admiral of the Ottoman Navy who lived over 400 years earlier. His reputation was known in history as a skilled mariner, but nothing explained how he could have charted lands far beyond the reach of his time. The scholar, unsettled, returned again and again to the bottom of the parchment, to a section that defied all reason. There, on the edge of the world, a coastline appeared. Smooth curves, inlets, and a vast expanse of land stretching across the southern edge of the map. At first, it seemed like another depiction of South America, perhaps drawn too far east. Yet as the scholars compared it, detail by detail, they grew cold. This was not South America. This was something far stranger. The outline mirrored the northern coast of Antarctica, not the frozen wall of ice known today, but the hidden landmass beneath. It was a coastline that modern science only revealed centuries later, when sonar readings mapped the continent under its ice cap. But in 1513, when Piri Reis created his map, Antarctica was still undiscovered. Its icy shore would not be seen by human eyes until 300 years after his death. How could such a thing be? How could a man of the early 16th century, working with nothing more than parchment, compass, and rumor, create a chart of a land not only unknown, but hidden under miles of ice? The questions filled the air of the Topkapi library. Each new set of eyes gazing upon the parchment carried away the same thought: this map should not exist. Some claimed it was coincidence, a misdrawn coast mistaken for another. But the more closely one looked, the more impossible it became to dismiss. The proportions matched, the angles aligned, the features bore resemblance to what only satellites in the 20th century had begun to uncover. The idea sent a chill through every listener who heard of it. What sources had Piri Reis used? In the margins of his map, he had left notes, simple, almost humble admissions. He claimed he had compiled his chart from 20 older maps, some from Greek sailors, others from Arabs, and still more from lands long forgotten. He mentioned maps said to be drawn from the time of Alexander the Great, and others handed down through whispers of ages past. He had not discovered these coasts himself. He had inherited their memory from somewhere older, deeper, and far stranger than history recorded. Imagine the weight of that discovery. To find in a neglected pile of scrolls, in a forgotten room, a piece of evidence suggesting that ancient civilizations had mapped the world in ways modern science could barely grasp. If it were true, it meant that knowledge had risen and fallen before, carried by hands now lost to time. It meant history was not a steady climb of discovery, but a cycle of forgetting and remembering. The scholar in 1929 must have felt the air thicken around him as he realized what he was holding. Every detail whispered of a secret too large for one man to bear. Outside the palace walls, the city of Istanbul carried on as normal, streets filled with vendors, The call to prayer rose above rooftops. Children played in narrow alleys. Yet inside that quiet chamber, time bent. A map made 5 centuries earlier had reached across the ages to stir questions no one wanted to ask. Those who studied it began to imagine stories. Could sailors from forgotten civilizations have crossed oceans long before Columbus? Could there have been cartographers who walked shores now buried under ice, who recorded coastlines in ages when climates were different? Could survivors of some ancient disaster have carried fragments of knowledge, passing them down in secret until they reached the hands of Piri Reis? Each question opened a darker path, one that shook the very roots of accepted history. The map was not simply parchment and ink. It became a mirror, reflecting a past that should have been impossible. The shapes on its surface did not fade with explanation. They grew sharper, more troubling, as more was learned. Modern scientists who examined it in later years found the parallels undeniable. The ice-free coast of Antarctica had not been seen by human eyes for at least 6,000 years, perhaps longer. Yet there it was, inked on a map from 1513. The discovery in 1929 was more than academic. It was psychological. It forced those who gazed upon it to confront the possibility that human memory was fractured, that civilizations before ours had known more than we allow ourselves to believe. It was as if the parchment whispered that beneath the familiar history of kings and empires lay an older world, half buried, waiting to surface. Those who held the map could not escape its pull. In the scholar's hands, it was no longer a relic of Ottoman glory. It became a question mark written across the face of time. The room where it was unrolled seemed smaller, the walls pressing inward, the silence heavier. With every passing hour, the discovery grew in weight until the whispers became voices, and the voices became rumors carried far beyond the palace. Some dismissed it, insisting it was error or accident. Others leaned in, convinced that what they saw was proof of something far greater, a forgotten chapter of humanity, an echo of Atlantis, a warning from ages that came before. Whatever it was, the Piri Reis Map became more than an object. It became a haunting. And always, at the bottom of the parchment, the coastline waited, smooth, unmistakable, carved by a hand that should not have known it. The scholars stared at it, tracing its lines with trembling fingers, yet no answer came. What they saw looked like Antarctica, but not the Antarctica buried under ice and snow. It looked like a land alive, green and free. That realization drew a silence deeper than words, a silence filled with unease, as if the parchment itself knew it was not meant to be revealed. The map, resting in that quiet chamber of Istanbul, stared back at those who studied it, and with every glance, it whispered the same chilling truth: this should not exist. In the great expanse of Ottoman history, filled with sultans, battles, and endless campaigns across land and sea, one figure stands apart. His name was Piri Reis. To the world, he was an admiral, a commander of ships, a servant of empire. Yet beneath the surface of his reputation, there was something stranger, something that gave his work a shadow, a weight beyond simple maps and navigation. For Piri Reis was not only a sailor of seas, he was a collector of secrets. Born in the late 15th century, he grew up in an age where oceans were being crossed for the first time. Empires stretched their arms toward the edges of the world, and sailors risked their lives to bring back news of coasts no one in the old world had ever seen. For most, it was a time of discovery. But for Piri Reis, it was something else. He believed the world was not being discovered. It was being rediscovered. From his youth, he sailed with fleets of the Ottoman Navy, mastering the winds of the Mediterranean. But while others hunted for trade and glory, he kept his eyes on something deeper. Every time a ship docked, every time a foreign sailor spoke of far lands, Piri Reis listened. He gathered fragments, copied sketches, recorded rumors of rivers, bays, and mountains, like a detective piecing together a puzzle. He filled his mind with parts of a world that seemed too vast to belong to one man's lifetime. By the time he rose to the rank of admiral, his obsession had taken form. He began compiling his great chart in 1513, carefully stitching together the scattered fragments of knowledge he had collected. This map was not his alone. It was a tapestry of the memory of civilizations. It drew from Greek sailors, from Arab merchants, from Portuguese explorers, and from sources far older, whose names were already lost to history. On the parchment, he left notes in the margins. They were small, almost humble, yet more chilling than the map itself. He admitted his work was not original. He confessed he had copied from 20 older charts. Some were said to be from Alexander the Great's time, others from maps so ancient no one could say who first drew them. He wrote of sources carried down through generations, through whispers and secret collections, as if he himself did not fully understand the weight of the knowledge he carried. Imagine him, hunched over his parchment, quill in hand, ink staining his fingers. Around him, the Ottoman court bustled with politics and war. Yet here was one man bent over a chart, whispering to himself as he pieced together lines that no one else dared draw. He was not mapping only for his time. He was giving shape to knowledge from a world older than memory. The details he recorded were too precise, too confident to be guesswork. His coastlines followed curves that explorers of his day could not yet confirm. His rivers traced paths that Europeans had not yet walked. And most troubling of all, his southern edges revealed something no man of his century should have known. But before the world trembled at the sight of Antarctica upon his map, Piri Reis had already dropped hints. In his notes, he admitted something unsettling. Some of the maps he used, he said, were from an age long before, an age when the seas themselves were different, an age when floods had swept across continents and reshaped the face of the earth, an age before what he called the flood. It is a strange phrase to find written in the corner of a sailor's parchment. The flood, not a local storm, not a naval battle, but the great deluge spoken of in legends across the world. In Mesopotamian tablets, it was a flood of Gilgamesh. In the Hebrew scriptures, it was a flood of Noah. In countless myths of different peoples, it was a moment when water swallowed cities and left ruins beneath the waves. To most, these stories were allegories, tales meant to explain the fragility of mankind. But in the margins of his map, Piri Reis wrote as if it were history. If this was true, it meant he believed his sources were not from sailors of his own century, but from survivors of worlds washed away. Knowledge passed through hands that had seen coasts before they sank beneath rising seas. Knowledge that should have drowned with its makers, but somehow endured. The thought lingers like a shadow. Was Piri Reis only recording hearsay, or did he hold in his hands the last whispers of a civilization forgotten, a people who knew the earth in a form we no longer recognize? If so, then his map is not only geography, it is a ghost, a memory of a time before time. Scholars who later studied his notes found themselves staring not only at coastlines, but at this strange testimony. A man of the 16th century declaring openly that his chart was made with the help of maps from before the flood. He left no explanation, no defense, only the quiet certainty of his own hand. And so, Piri Reis became more than an admiral. He became a bridge across centuries. Through him, fragments of lost knowledge survived, fragments no one else dared preserve. He was not the author of a single map, but custodian of voices carried across ages. The story grows heavier when one considers how much has been lost. The burning of the Library of Alexandria erased thousands of works. The collapse of empires scattered archives. Fires, wars, and ignorance swept clean the shelves of history. Yet somehow, through the storm forgetting, pieces survived long enough to fall into the hands of a man obsessed with charts. What if his map is only a shard? What if the sources he used were once whole libraries, once part of civilizations we no longer name? What if their knowledge was not myth, but fact? These questions rise naturally, pressing against the mind of anyone who studies his work. They are questions that shake the ground beneath the neat lines of history taught in books. It is tempting to see Piri Reis as a magician, a conjurer of impossible truths. Yet in reality, he was only a sailor with curiosity sharper than most. He asked for every scrap of knowledge he could find. He copied without pride, knowing he was no genius, only a collector. Perhaps that is why his work survived. He did not try to own the knowledge. He only tried to preserve it. Still, one cannot escape the sense that he was chosen, that history placed in his path these fragments of impossible maps, and he alone cared enough to gather them, while kings chased thrones and armies burned cities. Piri Reis drew coastlines that would outlive them all. The silence in his notes is almost as haunting as the words he wrote. He did not explain how these older maps came to be. He did not question who first made them. He simply accepted their existence, as though the world was older, stranger, and far more mysterious than anyone dared admit. He left us with no answers, only lines inked across parchment, daring us to question. And it is in this quiet that the map grows most unsettling. For if its sources were true, then humanity's story is not what we think. Civilizations may have risen before ours, reaching across oceans, measuring coasts, leaving behind records that barely survived. Floods may have swept them away, leaving only whispers. And one Ottoman admiral may have been the last to hold those whispers in his hands. The Piri Reis Map is often called a curiosity, a puzzle, an accident of history. But perhaps it is more. Perhaps it is a reminder that our knowledge is not complete, that beneath the neat order of textbooks lies a shadow of forgotten worlds, that we live not at the beginning of discovery, but in the echo of civilizations that came before. And at the heart of that echo stands Piri Reis, the mysterious cartographer, a man whose name survives not because of battles fought or empires built, but because he copied what others had long hidden, a man whose parchment whispers of seas and coasts that should not have been known, a man who claimed with quiet certainty that some of the sources came from a time before the flood. The ink has faded, the parchment has aged, but the questions remain. They linger in the silence of his notes, haunting every eye that dares to look closer. And as long as the map survives, so too does the mystery of the admiral who gathered knowledge from vanished worlds. When the Piri Reis Map was first spread across the table in 1929, the scholars who examined it knew something was wrong. The details were too precise, too certain for a chart drawn in the early 16th century. But it was not until decades later, when modern science turned its instruments to the frozen south, that the full weight of its mystery was revealed. For centuries, Antarctica was nothing more than a white blur at the bottom of the globe, a land of snow and endless ice, unreachable to most, unknown in every detail. Early explorers who ventured near its frozen shores found only walls of ice stretching beyond sight. The continent beneath remained hidden, its shape unknown, its secrets locked away under miles of frozen weight. That began to change in the 20th century. New technologies emerged. Sonar equipment allowed scientists to peer through the ice, to send sound waves deep below and record the echo of landforms no human eye had ever seen. Slowly, painstakingly, a new picture emerged. Beneath the ice, Antarctica was not just a barren wasteland. It had mountains, valleys, rivers, and a coastline that had once been free of snow. When the outlines were drawn, something unsettling appeared. The curves of the hidden land matched those of a coastline on the Piri Reis Map. A coastline inked on parchment more than 400 years earlier. A coastline Piri Reis could not have known. Scholars compared the shapes again and again. They laid the sonar images over the old parchment. The resemblance was undeniable. The Antarctic coast, revealed by modern science in the mid-20th century, was already recorded in 1513. Not the coast as it appears today, buried under ice, but the coast as it would have been thousands of years ago, when the land was still free. How could this be? How could an admiral of the Ottoman Navy, working in the age of Columbus, draw the outline of a land no one in his time had seen? The question spread like fire. Was it chance, a trick of the pen? Or was it evidence that Piri Reis had access to something older, something hidden, something that should not exist? The more one looks at the problem, the stranger it becomes. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, 300 years after Piri Reis completed his map. Even then, explorers saw nothing more than ice. The coast beneath remained invisible, buried under sheets a mile thick. Only with sonar in the 20th century did the hidden land reveal itself. And yet, 5 centuries earlier, Piri Reis drew it. Some dismissed the resemblance, calling it imagination, but the accuracy was not vague. The inlets and bays, the curve of the shorelines, the proportions, all matched what sonar uncovered. If coincidence, it was a coincidence that defied belief. If not, then the map was evidence of knowledge no one in his time could possibly have. And so the whispers began. Perhaps the knowledge came from an older world. Perhaps survivors of Atlantis, that legendary city said to have vanished beneath the waves, passed fragments of maps to later generations. Plato wrote of Atlantis as a great seafaring people who knew the oceans well, whose ships touched distant coasts. Could their legacy have slipped through the cracks of history, resurfacing in Piri Reis's work? Others dared to suggest something even stranger, the idea that the knowledge did not come from men at all, but from visitors beyond our world. Theory spoke of beings who descended long ago, teaching humanity arts and sciences, mapping the globe with technologies long forgotten, myths of gods walking among men, bringing light to civilizations, suddenly took on new meaning. Could the map be a fragment of their legacy? For those who studied it, both possibilities were equally haunting. If it was Atlantis, then human history stretched back into shadows of deep time, with civilizations rising and falling long before ours. If it was something not of this earth, then the map was evidence of contact with minds beyond human understanding. Either way, the conclusion was the same. The map was impossible. What troubled scientists most was not only the coastline itself, but the state in which it was drawn. The Antarctica of the Piri Reis Map was free of ice. Today, the continent is locked under glaciers, frozen beyond reach. But geological studies show that its coasts were once bare thousands of years ago, when the Earth's climate was different. If the map truly shows Antarctica without ice, it means its sources were drawn not centuries earlier, but millennia earlier. Perhaps as many as 12,000 years ago, before the great sheets of ice buried it. This raised a chilling thought. Someone, at some point in the distant past, had mapped the Earth as it was before the end of the last ice age. Someone had seen Antarctica free of its frozen mask and left records behind. Those records somehow passed through time, carried by unknown hands, until they reached Piri Reis. He copied them faithfully, leaving only a few notes to hint at their true origin. In the 20th century, as the sonar images confirmed what his map suggested, the world was left with a puzzle it could not answer. Official history insists that civilization, as we know it, began only 6,000 years ago. Farming, cities, writing, ships, all are said to belong to this recent age. Yet here was evidence that someone had mapped the globe long before. Evidence of knowledge that should not have existed. The Piri Reis Map became more than an artifact. It became a wound in the story of mankind, a tear in the fabric of accepted history, a question that could not be closed. How did Piri Reis know? Some scientists, unwilling to accept the implications, dismissed it as error, but the map remains. Its lines are too clear, its shapes too precise to vanish into doubt. Each time the coastline is compared to modern sonar images, the resemblance is undeniable. The Antarctic coast, hidden for thousands of years, sits inked upon a parchment drawn in 1513. This is not a detail to be ignored. This is not a curiosity to be laughed away. This is a reminder that knowledge may have existed before our time. Knowledge buried, suppressed, or forgotten, but not completely lost. It whispers that human history is not a straight line, but a circle of memory and forgetting, rising and falling through ages. And in that whisper lies the most unsettling truth of all. If civilizations before us could map the world, what else did they know? What else was lost in the floods that swept their cities away? What lies buried not only under ice, but under sand, under oceans, under the ruins we walk across without noticing? The impossible coastline is not only a shape on a map, it is a message written across time, telling us that we are not the first to know the earth, that others came before, walked its shores, measured its seas, and vanished, that the world's memory is deeper than we allow ourselves to believe. When the map was rediscovered in 1929, no one could have imagined it would spark such questions. Yet as science advanced, as sonar revealed what ice had hidden, the lines of Piri Reis grew more troubling. He should not have known. He could not have known. And yet, somehow he did. The silence around the map grows heavier with each passing year. It lies today in Istanbul, protected behind glass, its parchment fragile, its ink fading. But the questions it carries are eternal. How did he draw it? Who gave him the knowledge? And most of all, what does it mean for us? If the Piri Reis Map is true, then our past is not what we think. Our history is not 6,000 years old, but far older. Our civilizations are not the first, but one in a line of many. And the Earth itself holds memories that wait to surface. When ice melts, when sands shift, when oceans give back what they have swallowed. The impossible coastline of Antarctica, drawn centuries before its discovery, is more than a puzzle. It is a warning, a reminder that the story of humanity is incomplete, that the truth of who we are and how long we have walked this earth is still hidden in the shadows. And as long as that coastline lies inked upon the Piri Reis Map, the question will never die. When Piri Reis sat with his parchment in 1513, he did not claim the coastlines were his own discovery. He confessed, almost casually, that he copied them from older maps, not one or two, but 20 maps older than empires, 20 fragments of knowledge reaching across time, carrying whispers from civilizations long gone. The admission is chilling. Where did these maps come from? Who first drew them? And why are they no longer with us? To answer these questions, we must look not at the seas themselves, but at the great libraries of the ancient world. The libraries that once stood as guardians of human memory and then fell into ash. The greatest of them all was the Library of Alexandria. It was said to hold 500,000 scrolls, written in dozens of languages, carried from across the known world. Knowledge of medicine, astronomy, geography, and history is now lost forever. Ships docking in Egypt were searched, their manuscripts copied or confiscated, their wisdom added to the shelves of this vast treasure house. Some claim the library contained records from civilizations older than Greece, older than Egypt itself, perhaps even from lands that had already fallen into ruin. Yet what became of it? Fire, wars, carelessness. The details remain debated, but the truth is clear. The library burned not once but several times. Each blaze carried away voices that can never return. Imagine scrolls describing coastlines of continents when climates were different, maps of rivers before floods swallowed them, records of stars long before our telescopes. All of it turned to smoke, but fragments survived, copies carried away, hidden scrolls traded in secret, and perhaps, just perhaps, some of those fragments found their way, centuries later, into the hands of Ottoman scholars. Perhaps they passed through Byzantine libraries, through Arab collectors, through hidden monasteries, until at last they were copied by a man named Piri Reis, who admitted openly that his map was not new, but stitched together from ancient memory. And the Library of Alexandria was not alone. Across the ocean, the Mayan civilization left behind codices, folded books of bark paper, painted with symbols recording knowledge of astronomy, time, and geography. Only a handful survive today, hidden in museums, their pages fragile and incomplete. The rest were destroyed by fire in the 16th century, burned by those who feared their contents. Imagine the loss. Entire records of a people who measured the heavens with precision, who mapped cycles of stars, who tracked centuries with calendars more exact than our own. If Piri Reis truly gathered from 20 older maps, could some of the sources have reached him through whispers of these forgotten codices? Could knowledge have crossed oceans long before Europeans dared to sail west? The Mayans themselves spoke of earlier ages, destroyed by flood and fire, before their own time. Knowledge passed down through destruction, recorded again and again, until it reached hands far away. In Greece, too, scrolls once lined the shelves of temples and academies. Writings of geographers, sailors, and philosophers. Some are remembered by name. Eratosthenes, who measured the circumference of the earth with shadows and simple tools. Strabo, who described lands beyond his reach. Others are lost completely, known only through second-hand mentions. Their maps, their drawings, their careful notes on coastlines and winds are gone. Yet Piri Reis spoke of Greek sources among his 20 maps. He knew their legacy still lingered, scattered through the cracks of history. Think of what this means. Libraries across the world once carried knowledge that has since been erased. Fires in Alexandria, burnings in the Americas, scrolls lost in the collapse of Rome. Centuries of conquest swept away the memory of mankind. And yet, not everything vanished. Some fragments survived the waves of destruction. Notebooks tucked away, scrolls copied by hand in silence, fragments traded along spice routes, carried by merchants and sailors, fragile pieces of memory, somehow enduring. Piri Reis became the last link in a chain stretching back into darkness. He was not the creator, but the receiver. He gathered these scraps and copied them, giving us the faintest glimpse of what once existed in fullness. His margins tell the truth. His map is not only his work, it is a window into a time when human knowledge was greater than we remember. And here lies the most unsettling thought. Knowledge once open to mankind was deliberately buried. We are told history advances, that each generation builds upon the last. But the story of the lost libraries reveals another truth. History is fragile. Knowledge can vanish overnight. Great archives can burn, leaving silence where once there was memory. And sometimes it seems knowledge is not only lost, but destroyed on purpose. Who chose to erase it? Who feared what was written in those scrolls? Were the Mayan codices burned only for religion, or because they carried truths too troubling to allow? Was the Library of Alexandria an accident of war, or something more deliberate? Was the destruction of memory a way to control the future? The psychological weight of this question presses hard. Imagine a civilization thousands of years ago, knowing the coast of Antarctica before the ice came, charting the stars with accuracy, recording the cycles of time. Imagine that their knowledge survived in scrolls and maps, carried through generations. Imagine that somewhere in a library we no longer have, their truth was written down in detail. And imagine that fire, greed, or fear erased it all. The Piri Reis Map is only a shred of what could have been, a fragment that slipped through destruction, a single page torn from an entire book. It is both proof and accusation. Proof that forgotten knowledge existed. Accusation that it was taken from us. One cannot help but wonder what else was lost. What medicines were written in those libraries? What histories of people we no longer know? What machines or inventions? The map we have may not be the only impossible artifact erased from memory. Others may have turned to ash long before we ever knew them. And yet, enough survived to trouble us. Enough to whisper that we are not the first to walk this path of discovery. Enough to remind us that we live in the shadow of forgotten ages. Enough to show that the earth has secrets it once shared, and then withdrew. Piri Reis did not pretend to know the origin of his sources. He simply wrote that he used them. He accepted that his map was not his own creation, but a collection of knowledge older than empires. His honesty is what makes it haunting. He did not claim genius. He admitted inheritance. He admitted he was copying from something larger, something he did not fully understand. And so the mystery deepens. Somewhere in the ruins of burned libraries, in the ashes of codices, in the silence of destroyed scrolls, lies the truth of his sources. Somewhere beyond our reach, once stood the memory of an older world, a world that charted Antarctica before ice buried it, a world that mapped rivers before floods erased them, a world that recorded itself, only to vanish. The map survives, but the libraries do not. The fragments remain, but the whole is gone. And we are left with a question that no historian can answer. What power feared these maps enough to erase them? For thousands of years, the legend of Atlantis has drifted through human memory like a ghost ship lost at sea. Some dismiss it as a fable, a story told by Plato to warn against arrogance and pride. Others believe it hides a truth too great to ignore, a truth of a civilization so advanced, so powerful, that its memory was almost erased when the ocean swallowed it whole. And in the story of the Piri Reis Map, the shadow of Atlantis returns. Plato wrote of a great island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the strait we now call Gibraltar. He described a people with immense knowledge, who mastered navigation and crossed vast seas. He spoke of palaces with walls of gold and silver, of temples gleaming under the sun, of canals and harbors teeming with ships. Their city was a jewel of the earth, until the day it sank beneath the waves in a single terrible night. For centuries, many treated his words as myth, yet the details he gave were striking. He described Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia combined, positioned so that from it one could sail to other continents beyond the Atlantic. He claimed its people were not simple seafarers, but masters of science and engineering. They had knowledge of the stars, of measurements of the earth itself. What if that knowledge did not vanish with them? What if fragments of it survived, carried by the few who escaped the flood? What if the map's Piri Reis copy were the broken pieces, a legacy left behind by those who once ruled Atlantis? The thought is unsettling, for the Piri Reis Map contains coastlines no one in the 16th century could know, and yet they were there, drawn with precision. Some scholars believe this is a silent testimony of an ancient seafaring civilization, one that mapped the world long before recorded history. Who else could it have been if not the people Plato described? Imagine their ships cutting through the waters of a world far older than ours. Imagine them tracing coastlines of continents before ice buried them. Imagine them recording the shape of Antarctica when its shores were free and green. To modern eyes, this feels impossible. But to those who lived in that age, it was their world, their home, their map. The more we learn of ancient ruins, the less the myth of Atlantis seems like fantasy. Stone structures older than history rise from the jungles and deserts, their builders unknown. Great blocks weighing hundreds of tons, move with techniques we still cannot explain. Cities aligned with stars, pyramids echoing constellations, carvings of celestial knowledge. Everywhere, fragments point to a memory older than we are taught. Could all of these be echoes of the same lost civilization? The Piri Reis Map stares back at us with quiet certainty. Its lines whisper that someone long before us knew the earth as a whole, not in pieces, not as scattered coastlines, but as a globe. That knowledge demands a civilization with mastery of navigation, astronomy, and cartography. It demands ships strong enough to cross oceans, minds trained enough to measure distances, instruments advanced enough to chart latitudes. Who could have done this in the distant past, if not Atlantis? Plato wrote that Atlantis fell 9,000 years before his own time. If true, that would place it more than 11,000 years ago, a date that stirs unease, where it falls near the end of the last ice age. Around 12,000 years ago, seas rose dramatically, swallowing coastlines, drowning fertile lands, reshaping the earth we know. Could Atlantis have been one of those lands lost of floods? Could its survivors have scattered, carrying fragments of their knowledge into the dawn of our history? Think of the tension this creates. On one hand, official history insists civilization began only 6,000 years ago. On the other, the Piri Reis Map suggests knowledge from much earlier. The two timelines do not agree. Either the map is a fraud of impossible coincidence, or history is older and stranger than we admit. For those who dare to consider the second possibility, the legend of Atlantis is no longer only a story. It becomes evidence. Evidence that humans once walked the earth with knowledge equal to, or even greater than, our own. Evidence that they mapped Antarctica before ice covered it. Evidence that their ships sailed oceans long before Columbus or the Vikings or the Phoenicians. This idea is not comfortable. It unsettles us because it suggests we are not the first, and perhaps not the greatest. It suggests our triumphs are only a shadow of what once was. It suggests the cycle of civilization may rise and fall over thousands of years, with each age believing is a beginning, when in truth it is only another chapter. Atlantis becomes not only a city of myth, but a mirror of our own fragility. Plato said its people grew arrogant, their pride bringing their ruin. The sea swallowed them, and their greatness became a warning. But perhaps their story is not only moral, perhaps it is literal. Perhaps a great people, with ships, maps, and science, did exist. Perhaps their memory survives in whispers, in ruins, and in fragments like the Piri Reis Map. If so, then the haunting question remains: how far did their knowledge reach? Did they map only their coast or the entire globe? Did they measure the heavens, leaving records and alignment of stone? Did they leave behind technology we no longer understand? And why, if they were so advanced, could they not save themselves from a flood? The silence is heavy. The oceans hold their secrets well. Cities may lie buried beneath waves, carved stone waiting in the deep. Stories passed down became myths. Myths became legends. Legends became fantasy. And yet, a map on fragile parchment hints that at least part of it was true. The coastline of Antarctica on the Piri Reis Map is not a trick. It is there, drawn centuries before its discovery, in detail only modern science could confirm. Whoever first drew it knew the Earth in a way we cannot explain. If that knowledge came from Atlantis, then their memory is not gone. It is with us, hidden in fragments, surfacing when we dare to look. The story of Atlantis collides with geography, history, and mystery. It forces us to ask questions we are not ready to answer. Could a civilization tens of thousands of years ago have been more advanced than we believe possible? Could they have mapped Antarctica without ice? Could their ruins still wait, buried under water, under sand, under ice? The legend no longer feels distant. It feels like a shadow that still follows us. The Piri Reis Map, with its impossible coastlines, keeps that shadow alive. It reminds us that behind the neat surface of history lies something older, deeper, and far more mysterious. And so the story lingers. Atlantis, the city of gold and silver, the city of ships and temples, swallowed in one night, and yet perhaps not fully gone. Perhaps its sailors lived long enough to pass on their maps. Perhaps their knowledge survived in fragments, to be copied by hand centuries later. Perhaps their memory is not only in Plato's words, but in ink on parchment, in lines that still trouble us today. The shadow of Atlantis stretches across time, touching the map of Piri Reis. It whispers that history is not as young as we think, that we are not the first to map the earth, that a world long gone still speaks, if we dare to listen. And if they truly mapped Antarctica without ice, then their world was not thousands of years old, but tens of thousands. A world before the flood, a world whose memory still lingers, waiting for us to see it. When scholars first unrolled the Piri Reis Map in 1929, their eyes were drawn to its strange coastlines. But as time passed and the parchment was studied more carefully, another layer of mystery began to surface. It was not only what the map showed that disturbed the experts, it was how it had been drawn. At first glance, the map looked like any other from the age of exploration. Ships with curved sails dotted the seas, notes in neat Ottoman script lined the edges. Drawings of exotic animals roamed across unfamiliar lands. Yet beneath this artistry, hidden in the mathematics of its lines, lay something extraordinary. The map was not crude. It was not guesswork. It was astonishingly precise. Modern cartographers began to test it, overlaying its features with those of modern maps. To their surprise, the details matched far too well for the 16th century. The coastlines of South America were drawn with accuracy centuries ahead of their time. The distances between certain points, when measured, reflected not flat projections, but calculations suited for a spherical Earth. The map used principles that should not have existed until far later. The shock deepened when researchers realized a map seemed to employ spherical trigonometry. This branch of mathematics allows for the measurement of positions on a globe, accounting for its curvature. It is the foundation of accurate navigation in the modern world. But in 1513, this was unheard of. At that time, maps were flat, distorted guesses at the shapes of continents. Sailors still struggled to measure longitude with any precision. Yet Piri Reis's chart was built upon principles that would not be mastered until centuries later. How could this be? How can Admiral of the Ottoman Navy, copying fragments from older maps, produce a chart that reflected knowledge far beyond his age? The more the map was studied, the more unsettling it became. It was not simply advanced for 1513. It was advanced for almost any time before the modern era. Detectives of history began to comb through the parchment, searching for clues. In the margins, Piri Reis had left his notes. He admitted his sources were older, drawn from maps now lost. Some, he wrote, dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. Others were of unknown origin, passed down through centuries. He did not hide this. He confessed openly that he was a collector of fragments. But the precision of those fragments suggested something far greater. This was no ordinary inheritance of memory. Whoever had drawn the original maps had used methods no ancient civilization was supposed to possess. Accurate latitude requires advanced instruments, the ability to measure the height of stars with remarkable precision. Longitude requires even more. Knowledge of timekeeping, careful calculation across vast distances. Both were impossible with the tools of the ancient world, or so we are told. Yet, somehow, these maps existed. As the 20th century unfolded, scholars began to whisper comparisons. Could it be that these maps were relics of a forgotten civilization, one that had mastered sciences we believe are modern? Could Piri Reis have stumbled onto fragments of knowledge that survived the fall of worlds long before ours? The deeper they looked, the more troubling the evidence became. One analysis suggested that the map projected coastlines using a system similar to Mercator projection, a technique officially credited to Gerardus Mercator in 1569. Yet here it was, more than 50 years earlier, in the hands of an Ottoman admiral. And even Mercator's maps lacked the eerie precision of Piri Reis's chart. It was as if he was drawing upon something more ancient, more exact, more complete than anything Europe or the Middle East possessed in his time. Some cartographers grew uneasy. The shapes on the map seemed too clean, too certain. They did not match the clumsy trial and error of 16th century navigation. They matched instead the kind of knowledge one might expect from an age of satellites and global measurements. And yet, the parchment was real. Its ink was real. Its date was unquestionable. The Piri Reis map was no forgery. This realization drove many into silence. To accept a map as authentic meant to accept that history as we know it is incomplete. It meant that civilizations before us may have had knowledge equal to or even greater than our own. It meant that humanity's story did not begin in the Fertile Crescent 6,000 years ago, but stretched back into shadows tens of thousands of years deep. The psychological weight of this is immense. It is not easy to admit that the foundations of our history may be flawed. It is not easy to imagine that civilizations rose and fell long before ours, carrying sciences we have only recently rediscovered. Yet the Piri Reis map sits there, whispering this possibility to anyone who dares look. Some try to explain it away. Perhaps they argued Piri Reis simply guessed. But guesses do not produce coastlines that match sonar images centuries later. Others claim the similarities were coincidence. But coincidence does not explain the use of spherical trigonometry in an age before its invention. The more they try to dismiss it, the more the map refused to be silenced. For those willing to look closer, the mystery deepened further still. The map was not a patchwork of random guesses. Its fragments aligned too neatly. They suggested a global source, a master chart that once recorded the entire world with precision. Piri Reis had only a piece of it, but even that piece was enough to reveal the scale of its original. Whoever created it had mapped the Earth in ways that only our most advanced technologies can replicate today. And so the whispers grew louder. Perhaps the world we know is not the first. Perhaps long before recorded history, long before Egypt and Sumer and Babylon, there was another age, an age when humans sailed across oceans with confidence, when they measured the globe with accuracy, when they recorded coastlines with science, an age erased by time, by flood, by catastrophe, an age we remember only in fragments, in myths, in maps that should not exist. The Piri Reis map becomes not only a mystery, but a wound in the story of mankind, a wound that refuses to close, because its truth cannot be explained. To accept its accuracy is to accept that knowledge has been lost. To accept that knowledge has been lost is to accept that civilizations rose before ours, only to fall into silence. And to accept that possibility is to admit that we are not the first, and perhaps not the last. This thought is both haunting and humbling. It suggests that human history is not a straight line of progress, but a cycle. Civilizations rise, they flourish, they master the sciences, and then they fall. Their knowledge scatters, their cities vanish. Their names are forgotten, yet fragments survive, slipping through the cracks of time, waiting for someone like Piri Reis to gather them again. His map, so precise, so impossibly advanced, is one of those fragments. It is a message written across ages, telling us we are not alone in history, that others came before, and perhaps others will come after, that our place in time is smaller than we believe. When modern scientists measure the coastlines on the Piri Reis map, when they calculate the precision of its latitudes and longitudes, they felt the chill of this truth. They realized they were not only studying a map, they were studying the echo of a civilization lost to prehistory. The forbidden accuracy of the Piri Reis map remains one of the greatest mysteries of our past, too advanced for 1513, too advanced for any age before our own. yet undeniably real. Its lines are not fantasy. They are not myth. They are evidence. Evidence that history, as we know it, is incomplete. Evidence that the story of mankind stretches deeper into time than we dare to imagine. And so the parchment waits, silent in its glass case, a relic of an admiral who copied from sources older than memory, a relic that whispers a science is too advanced for his time, a relic that forces us to ask the question we cannot escape. Did Piri Reis stumble onto fragments of civilization lost to prehistory? The Earth has not always looked the way we see it today. 12,000 years ago, the world stood at the edge of transformation. Vast glaciers stretched across continents, locking oceans into walls of frozen silence. Rivers carved deep scars through ice and stone. The air was sharper, colder, heavier with winds that carried dust from frozen plains. Humanity was there, scattered in tribes, surviving in caves, forests, and valleys. But the Earth itself was preparing for change. The Ice Age was ending. As the glaciers began to melt, seas rose. Inch by inch, foot by foot, coastlines vanished beneath the waves. Lands once green and fertile drowned under salt water. Rivers swelled, lakes overflowed, and entire regions disappeared. To those who lived in that time, it must have felt like the end of the world. Villages swallowed, hunting grounds drowned. Temples, if they existed, lost the tides. The earth was rewriting its own boundaries, and people could do nothing but watch. Modern science tells us sea levels rose more than 400 feet as the ice melted. Imagine what that means. Cities built along ancient coasts, now gone forever. Harbors swallowed, ruins lying silent beneath the ocean. If civilizations existed in those times, their memory would be buried deep below the waves, hidden from our eyes. And yet, fragments remain. Myths from cultures across the globe speak of a great flood. In Mesopotamia, the story of Gilgamesh tells of a man warned to build a vessel before waters consumed the earth. In the Hebrew text, Noah built an ark to survive the rising tide. In Hindu tradition, Manu was saved from a flood that covered the land. Even in the Americas, tribes spoke of floods that destroyed the old world, leaving only a few survivors to begin again. Different peoples, different lands, yet the same memory, the same echo of catastrophe. Could all of them be remembering the same event? The end of the Ice Age, when seas rose and glaciers vanished. If so, then the flood myths are not stories at all, but history told in the language of survival. And if survivors did exist, if fragments of ancient people endured while their cities drowned, then perhaps they carried something with them, not just memories, but records. Not just stories, but maps, knowledge encoded into parchment, bark, or stone, passed down in secrecy, protected through generations. The Piri Reis Map begins to look different through this lens. Not the creation of one man, not even a work of his age, but the faint shadow of a world erased by water, a world that knew the coast of Antarctica before the ice, a world that charted the earth as it was, not as we see it now. Picture the survivors. They stood on high ground, watching as the ocean crept inland day by day. Fields turned to marsh. Villages became islands. Finally, the waves took everything. To survive, they fled to higher lands. Some carried little more than memory, but others, perhaps, carried scrolls, maps, instruments, tools that held the secret to their vanished age. Those survivors became wanderers, strangers in new lands. They told their children of the world before. They carved symbols, built monuments, aligned stones with the stars. They encoded their knowledge into myths, so it would not be lost. And perhaps, just perhaps, some of their charts survived long enough to be copied again and again until they reached the hands of Piri Reis. This idea unsettles us because it means we are not the first. It means that before the civilizations we know, Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, there were others, civilizations that lived and thrived in a world now drowned. Civilizations erased not by war, but by nature itself. Civilizations whose memory lingers only in fragments, myths, ruins, and impossible maps. The psychological tension grows when we consider what was lost. Entire libraries swallowed by water, entire cities buried under the sea. Knowledge of astronomy, navigation, mathematics, Knowledge that would take us thousands of years to rediscover. And in the silence of the ocean floor, those ruins still lie, unreachable, untouched, holding stories that may never return. Yet fragments slip through. The Mayans spoke of ages destroyed by floods and fire. The Egyptians recorded in their temple walls that their civilization descended from earlier ones, whose memories stretched back into the thousands of years. Plato himself wrote of Atlantis, a great island swallowed in a single night, a city of seafarers who knew the oceans well. Are these myths, or are they coded memories of the same event? The end of the Ice Age, the flood that swept across the earth? If the survivors carried maps, then the Piri Reis Map is more than a curiosity. It is testimony. Testimony that memory can survive catastrophe. Testimony that knowledge does not vanish completely, but waits for the right hands to preserve it. Testimony that the human story is older than we believe. The map shows Antarctica without ice. For this to be true, the original sources must date back more than 12,000 years, when the continent's coasts were free. This places the knowledge at the very moment when the Ice Age was ending, the very moment when seas were swallowing the world, the very moment when myths of the flood were born. Think of the precision required. The coastlines were not guessed. They were measured. This means ships strong enough to cross oceans, instruments advanced enough to calculate positions, minds trained in mathematics and astronomy. Could small tribes of hunters and gatherers have achieved this? Or was there another world, another civilization, erased by time, whose survivors carried fragments of its knowledge forward? If so, then their story is the story of humanity itself, a story of loss, of survival, of memory whispered across generations, a story hidden in myths, encoded in temples, preserved in maps that should not exist. The whispers of floods and ice are not only about destruction, they are about continuity, about the fragile thread of knowledge that connects us to ages long gone, about the survivors who refuse to let the memory of their world die, about the fragments that surface centuries later, confusing and haunting us. Darkness hangs over this thought, because if knowledge was carried forward, then someone had to protect it. Someone had to choose which fragment survived. Someone had to hide it, keep it safe, pass it secretly through generations, which means a Piri Reis Map is not only evidence of survival, it is evidence of guardianship, evidence that long after the waters rose, people still carried the burden of memory, refusing to let it disappear completely. This changes the way we see history. It is no longer a simple story of invention and progress. It is a story of rediscovery. What we call new may only be old knowledge reborn. What we think we have achieved may have been achieved before, by hands whose names we no longer know. The end of the Ice Age was not only the end of a climate, it was the end of an age of mankind. Yet echoes of that age linger, in myths, in ruins, in impossible maps, in the whispers of floods and ice. And if survivors carried fragments of their world into ours, then one question still remains. Who carried this knowledge forward, and why was it hidden? When the Piri Reis Map was first unrolled, scholars thought they were looking at geography, coastlines, rivers, mountains, a chart for sailors. But the deeper they studied its lines, the stranger became. Some began to whisper that the map was not only about land, it was about something more. That hidden within its drawings, within its markings and notes, lay a code, a message disguised as a chart. At first, the suggestion seemed absurd. A map is meant to guide ships, not to hide secrets. But slowly, as researchers traced the strange lines across its surface, they noticed patterns, routes drawn across oceans, lines that seemed to stretch too far, as if pointing toward coasts unknown in Piri Reis's time. Some claimed these were not ordinary trade routes, but sea paths from an older age, highways of the ocean, remembered by those who sailed before the ice, before the floods. The thought unsettled everyone. What if the map was not only a copy of coastlines, but a preserved record of global navigation? What if it was a manual for crossing the earth, for moving between continents long before modern ships existed? The idea gave the map a new weight. It was no longer a relic. It was a code book. The more one looked, the more suggestive it became. Certain symbols repeated near coasts. Some looked like harbors, others like markers pointing the way. In the seas, Strange drawings appeared: animals, ships, even creatures of myth. Were these mere decorations or warnings? Were they meant to mark dangers, currents, storms? Or were they clues, left for those who could understand them? The style of the notes troubled scholars. Piri Reis wrote that he had copied from 20 older maps. If those originals contained markings, he would have copied them faithfully, which means some of the symbols may not have been his at all. They may be echoes from civilizations lost. Symbols carried across centuries, copied and recopied, their meaning fading even as their shape survived. What if those symbols were once part of a greater system? What if the Piri Reis Map is not just geography, but the last surviving piece of an ancient network of coded charts, a system designed not only to show where lands were, but to preserve knowledge about how to reach them, and perhaps warnings about what awaited? Some researchers grew bolder in their theories. They pointed to lines that seemed to converge, as if mapping not only coastlines but sea routes spanning the Atlantic. These were not guesses. They were precise, purposeful, almost as if the original makers of the map wanted to leave behind instructions for others who would come after. The thought leads to an even darker possibility. Was the map a warning? Not just of how to travel the seas, but of what had been lost. The myths of floods and fire echo in the background. Perhaps the survivors of that age knew their world was ending. Perhaps they encoded their knowledge into maps, hiding warnings within coastlines, so that those who came later might understand. Imagine it: survivors standing on high ground as waters rose, carefully marking coasts and routes, not only for themselves, but for the future. A final act of memory, a final message. Perhaps their map was not only a guide across seas, but a warning of what happens when the earth changes, when climates shift, when ice melts. A warning of cataclysm. The Piri Reis Map becomes haunting in this light. A chart, yes, but also a message written in code, waiting across centuries for us to see it. We stare at its coastlines, but perhaps we miss its true meaning. Perhaps its makers want to tell us something about cycles of destruction, about floods that come again and again, about the fragility of civilizations. The tension grows when we focus on the southern edge of the map. There, where Antarctica seems to appear, strange symbols cluster, shapes that look like settlements, dots and lines that seem to suggest presence. But who could have lived there in a land we believe was always frozen? Unless it was not always frozen. Unless the coastlines were once green, fertile, alive. If those symbols do mark settlements, then the implication is staggering. It means people lived in Antarctica tens of thousands of years ago. It means their memories survived in maps that were copied through ages. It means that the Piri Reis Map carries not only coastlines, but the last traces of human presence in a land now buried under ice. This possibility sends chills down the spine. For if it is true, then our story is older than we can bear. It means humans, or people like us, once sailed seas and built settlements in places we now call uninhabitable. It means they mastered navigation and cartography before our earliest known civilizations even learned to farm. It means we are the shadow, not the beginning. The coded nature of the map suggests secrecy. Why hide warnings in coastlines? Why not write them plainly? Perhaps because they fear their knowledge will be destroyed and maps will be the only things copied faithfully through generations. A map, after all, is a practical tool. If knowledge needed to survive, perhaps it was safer hidden in geography than in stories that could be forgotten. And so, the Piri Reis Map might not only be a chart of seas, it might be a library in disguise. A coded archive of warnings about routes, climates, and catastrophes. A message passed forward in the only way it could endure. The dark academia tone grows stronger here. We are left with fragments, not clarity. We see the symbols, but their meaning is hidden. We trace the lines, but their purpose escapes us. We sense intention, but it is lost in time. Like readers of an ancient script, we stand before the Piri Reis Map, knowing it speaks, but unable to hear its full voice. Still, the whispers are enough. The lines across oceans suggest knowledge of routes long before Columbus, long before Magellan. The markings near Antarctica suggest settlements in a land we call impossible. The strange drawings in the seas suggest warnings of dangers now forgotten. Together, they form a code that waits for us to solve it. And as long as the map survives, so too does its mystery. Each symbol taunts us with what we do not know. Each line reminds us that someone, somewhere, once saw the earth differently. Someone new sees we cannot explain. Someone recorded a world that should not exist. The Piri Reis Map may be more than geography. It may be the last coded warning of a civilization erased by floods and ice. A warning hidden in coastlines, waiting centuries for us to see it. A warning that tells us our history is older, stranger, and far more fragile than we believe. And near the frozen edge, near the southernmost coast, the symbols remain. Silent, precise, chilling, shapes that look like settlements, marked on a land that should have been nothing but ice. By the middle of the 20th century, the Piri Reis Map was no longer just a curiosity tucked away in Istanbul. Quietly, in offices far from public view, it drew the interest of powers with more than academic curiosity. To some, it was not only history, it was a potential weapon of knowledge. The map had been studied by scholars since its rediscovery in 1929. But by the 1940s and 1950s, its strange accuracy began to attract attention in military circles. At first, it might seem odd. Why would generals and admirals care about a chart drawn on gazelle skin in 1513? But then came the realization its southern edge, the one showing Antarctica without ice, was impossible. If the map was accurate, it meant someone had once charted a continent buried under miles of frozen silence. Someone had knowledge beyond what modern nations themselves had only begun to uncover. At the close of World War II, whispers spread that the U.S. Navy took special interest in such mysteries. The world was shifting into the Cold War, and any scrap of knowledge, no matter how ancient, might hold advantage. If a forgotten map hinted at hidden coasts, hidden routes, hidden lands, it was worth more than gold. And so Antarctica, the white desert at the bottom of the globe, suddenly became a focus. Officially, it was about science, about exploration. But beneath the surface, another story was unfolding, one of secrecy, one of urgency, one where ancient knowledge and modern power collided. In 1946, the United States launched what it called Operation High Jump, a massive naval expedition to Antarctica involving 13 ships, over 4,000 men, aircraft, and advanced equipment. Officially, it was a training mission in extreme cold, but the scale was far beyond any simple drill. It looked more like an invasion, and at the heart of speculation lies a chilling thought. Was this sudden interest in Antarctica linked to the strange coastlines inked on the Piri Reis Map? Detectives of history began piecing together fragments. Documents declassified years later suggested that the mission was not as smooth as reported. Aircraft were lost. Equipment failed under strained conditions. Some accounts claimed the expedition ended months earlier than planned, returning home in silence. The reasons given never satisfied curious minds. Why would force of that size, backed by such resources, suddenly turn back? Some pointed again to the map. If the U.S. Navy had studied it, perhaps they were searching for something beneath the ice. Not just geography, but ruins, evidence of settlements, of structures, of something older than mankind's recorded history. What if those strange markings along the Antarctic coast on the Piri Reis Map were not errors, but hints? What if they marked the location of forgotten outposts built long before the modern age? The psychological tension grows when we consider the secrecy. If nothing unusual was found, why would so much remain classified? Why would reports vanish into archives, stamped with silence? Why would rumors persist of discoveries too dangerous to share? Some historians whisper that the military treated the map not as an artifact, but as intelligence, as if it still carried secrets, as if its lines could point to something hidden, something the world was not meant to see. Others recall how quickly Antarctica became restricted after the war. By 1959, the Antarctic Treaty declared the continent free of military activity, open only for science. On the surface, it sounded noble, but beneath, some suspected it was a way to keep prying eyes away, a way for nations to guard whatever might lie beneath the ice, a way to ensure no one stumbled upon ruins that could shatter history. The thriller deepens with the thought of classified files. Over the years, Fragments have leaked, references to unusual conditions, strange encounters, unexplained losses. None of it conclusive, all of it unsettling. Together, they paint a picture of something hidden, something that made world powers nervous enough to bury it under layers of secrecy. If the Piri Reis Map truly reflected knowledge from a lost civilization, then any ruins beneath Antarctica could change everything we believe. The military would not ignore such a possibility. They would study it, guard it, suppress it. Knowledge is power, and ancient knowledge might be the most dangerous power of all. Imagine what could be found under miles of ice, entire cities preserved by cold, untouched for tens of thousands of years, machines fossilized in frozen silence, records of sciences that could rival our own. If such things existed, revealing them would shake the foundations of every nation, every religion, every history book. No wonder secrecy would be absolute. The suppressed revelations linger like a shadow. We see only fragments, hints, whispers. A naval operation larger than any needed for training. A sudden retreat. Reports locked away. A treaty that shuts down the most remote continent. And in the background, a map that should not exist, whose coastlines match sonar scans centuries later. The psychological thriller of it all is not only what may have been found, but what may have been hidden. Did the military uncover ruins beneath the ice? Did they see structures too advanced, too impossible to belong to prehistoric mankind? Did they realize that the Piri Reis Map was not a curiosity, but a guide? The thought grows darker still. If such knowledge was found, what became of it? Was it stored away in vaults, studied in secret, used for purposes we cannot imagine? Was it buried again, this time under silence, so the world would never know? The history of mankind may have been rewritten behind closed doors, with the rest of us left in ignorance. And yet the map remains, fragile, fading, but undeniable. Its coastlines continue to mock official history. Its markings continue to stir suspicion. And the fact that world powers treated it with interest and secrecy suggests that even they could not dismiss its mystery. Why would a chart from 1513 matter so much to admirals and generals of the 20th century? Why would a forgotten parchment be studied alongside modern intelligence? Why would secrecy wrap itself around an artifact so old? The questions circle endlessly, unanswered. The Piri Reis Map becomes more than history. It becomes part of the silent war of knowledge, a relic that refuses to vanish, forcing us to wonder what lies beneath the ice and why some are so desperate to keep it hidden. The suppressed revelations are not in what has been told, but in what is not. In the silences of reports, in the missing pages, in the shadows of classified files. They suggest that the map still carries secrets. Secrets guarded not only by time, but by those who believe the world is not ready to hear them. And as long as the map survives, the question will never rest. Why would world powers guard this ancient chart as if it still carried secrets? In a quiet hall of Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, under glass and dim lights, lies a fragment of parchment that should not exist. To the casual eye, it looks like any relic of the age of sail. Faded ink, careful drawings of ships, notes in the margin, sea monsters roaming across oceans. Yet when one looks closer, the unease begins. For this fragile piece of gazelle skin carries a truth far too large for its frame. The Piri Reis Map is more than 500 years old. Its date is clear, its author known. It was drawn in 1513 by an admiral of the Ottoman fleet, a man who admitted openly that his work was not his own, but a collection of older sources. Sources he claimed were copied from maps long gone, maps older than empires, maps perhaps older than memory itself. That admission should have made it only an artifact of curiosity. But what it shows has made it into something else. A coastline that should not be there. Antarctica not buried under ice, but revealed in naked lines. Bays and inlets drawn with precision that even modern science confirmed centuries later. Coastlines no one in 1513 could possibly have seen. And that is why the map does not belong. It does not belong in the story we tell of our world, of our history, of our rise as civilizations. It defies the neat timelines of textbooks. It defies the comfort of believing we are the first, the greatest, the most advanced. The Piri Reis Map whispers that we are not, that others came before, that their knowledge still lingers, faint and fragile, waiting for us to notice. For generations, scholars have struggled with it. Some dismiss it, some fear it, some study it in silence. To accept it is to accept that history is not what we think, that mankind's story stretches far back into shadows, that survivors of forgotten ages carried knowledge across time, guarding fragments through floods, wars, and fire, that libraries burned, but not everything was lost. Theories swirl like storm clouds around the map. Some say it is the last echo of Atlantis, that legendary city Plato described, a seafaring empire swallowed by water, but remembered in fragments. Others claim it is proof of visitors from beyond our world, beings who walked among men and left behind their maps of Earth. Still others believe it is nothing more than a reminder of our own fragility, that knowledge rises and falls. Civilizations come and go, and memory can be older than the ruins we see. Whatever the truth, the unease remains. This map should not exist, and yet it does. It sits behind glass, silent, refusing to explain itself. Its lines continue to mock the idea that history is simple. Its coastlines continue to challenge what we think we know. It is a paradox written in ink, and perhaps it is why world powers have guarded it, studied it, even feared it. Because if the Piri Reis Map is true, then the world is not as we are told. It means humanity has lived through ages we no longer remember. It means survivors of floods and ice once mapped the earth with sciences we pretend to have invented. It means our place in time is smaller than we like to believe. Think of the psychological weight of this realization. For a child, it is like being told fairy tales may have been real. For an elder, it is like discovering that everything remembered as myth may carry truth. For the ordinary man or woman, it is like being told that the ground beneath our feet holds memories older than the stars we name. The Piri Reis Map speaks to every heart because it reminds us of something primal, that the world is ancient and we are only passing through. The map is fragile, its parchment worn by centuries, its ink fading, yet what it carries has outlived kingdoms, empires, wars, and revolutions. It has survived attempts to bury it, silence it, dismiss it. It has survived because the truth it whispers is stronger than denial. It has survived because fragments of memory always do. And so it remains waiting, silent yet defiant, behind glass yet alive. A map that should not exist, but does. A relic that tells us we are not the first to know the earth. A message across ages, reminding us that history is far older and stranger than we dare to believe. Perhaps one day the ice will melt. Perhaps the coastlines hidden beneath Antarctica will rise again, revealed to the world. Perhaps then, the Piri Reis Map will no longer be seen as legend, but as prophecy. Until that day, it waits. And so do we. If this story has stirred something inside you, share it. Pass it on. The more who hear, the harder it becomes to bury the truth again. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the legends and mysteries still waiting to be told. Leave your thoughts, your theories, your questions, for stories like this are not solved by one voice, but by many. The coastline waits beneath the ice, and perhaps one day, when it melts, the map will no longer be legend but prophecy.